As you all know, Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy are the individuals that decided to spearhead the GOP's latest effort to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. Now, thankfully, their bill failed miserably, and I think the best part about this whole ordeal is that right after Susan Collins announced that she would not be supporting their bill, they were forced to then go on CNN and debate the merits of their bill against Bernie Sanders and Amy Klobuchar. So it already wasn't a good night for Bill and Lindsey to begin with, but it got even worse for them once they took the stage, because Bernie Sanders absolutely decimated them during this debate. I mean, it wasn't even a close match. I mean, he wiped the floor with them. He handed them their asses, and it was just so great to watch, especially after they were trying to promote their draconian bill that would strip millions of their health insurance coverage. Now, the reason why they lost this debate was namely because they trotted out the same tired arguments and expected those same old arguments to resonate at a time when momentum for single payer may be at an all-time high, and their arguments against single payer primarily focused on the same three key points from Republicans: choice, socialism, and big government. And this is what the Republican Party tends to do, because since they can't really debate with Democrats or progressives based on the merits of their argument, they have to resort to fear-mongering. And that is exactly what they did during this debate. And they tried to make this whole debate about Medicare for all. And I'm glad they did, because it backfired tremendously, not in their favor, of course. But you see, the reason why Bill Cassidy at least thought that we should listen to what he had to say, even though he didn't have a substantive argument for his bill, was because he used to be a physician. So you can trust him. And he made sure that we knew he used to be a physician.
Now, I'm a physician. I know I can kind of read through that code. I'm a doc. I understand. Again, I started this as a physician. I am first a doctor. When I was a doctor, I learned. For 25 years, I worked in the public hospital system of Louisiana. Again, I've treated folks like you, and my hat's off. I worked for how many years in a public hospital for the uninsured? Probably most of my patients were Democrats.
Now, even though Senator Bill Cassidy tried to legitimize himself here by reminding you over and over and over again that he's a physician, well, really, he has no credibility on this particular issue, because the arguments that he made in favor of his bill and against single payer were downright ridiculous.
When the patient has the power, the system lines up to serve her. And when the bureaucrat has the power, it first serves the bureaucrat. Now, this is a debate about who has the power. Is it you, the patient, or is it the federal government? The narrative on the other side is that you don't have the capability to care for yourself, that your governor is corrupt, scheming to take away your protections if you have a pre-existing condition. And they think the federal government taking control of your life is a better way to go. The logical extension of that, unfortunately, is the Charlie Gard case. The Charlie Gard case, in which the single payer of England said the decision of the life of your child is too important for the parents to make, and then the child died. I will tell you, if it's a decision about you versus the federal government, we side with you. Those who oppose us and those who want single payer, they choose otherwise.
The big government shouldn't be in charge of healthcare for anyone, because those self-serving bureaucrats, they don't really care about our healthcare needs. They only care about serving themselves. See, because every time we go to the DMV, we all know that the person at the DMV counter, they're trying to scam us, right? Unlike those health insurers who are certainly only motivated by profit, they're not trying to scam us, but bureaucrats are trying to scam us. That's not really how this works. There's no profit incentive there for bureaucrats, Bill. So what you're saying doesn't make any sense. If you go to the private industry, which is what you want, then those individuals are motivated by profit. Now, he states here, this is a debate about who has the power. Is it you, the patient, or is it the federal government? Well, it's currently neither, because the private insurance companies have all the power in this country. Not only do they control healthcare, but they buy off politicians, and their shitty plans have to be subsidized by the federal government because they don't provide us with enough benefits. And one thing that irritated me about Bill Cassidy here is that he also brought up the Charlie Gard story, and we're going to continue to hear about this story from Republicans. And the worst part is that when they talk about this story, they pretend as though the British government chose to end treatment to Charlie Gard, when this was a decision made by his doctor after coming to the conclusion that further treatment wouldn't save him and would be unnecessary. And if Bill and other Republicans actually cared about people dying because they were denied health care, then why don't we ever see them talking about the thousands of people in the United States that die every single year because they don't have health insurance? Why don't they mention that? Why don't they ever talk about the Americans that go bankrupt even if they do have insurance but had to have a procedure that wasn't covered under their current plans? Why don't we ever hear Republicans talking about that? It's because Republicans like Bill Cassidy don't actually give a damn about you. They have an agenda, and what Bill Cassidy's agenda here is to do is to promote the interests of his donors in the health insurance industry. And really, Bill Cassidy here, he's the prototypical politician that lies, obfuscates, and dodges questions in order to promote his bankrupt ideas that actually don't serve the American people. And there was a perfect example of this when Bernie Sanders brought up his bill to allow us to import drugs from Canada. And the way that Bill responded to Bernie Sanders was probably one of the most masterful dodges I've ever seen. He just completely avoided what Bernie Sanders talked about and went on some other rant about an entirely different subject.
Last year, the 5 major pharmaceutical industries made $50 billion in profit. You got CEOs in the pharmaceutical industry who make millions and millions and millions of dollars in compensation, and 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford the medicine they need. Are you going to join me in saying that Medicare should negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry, which is what every other major country on earth does? Are you going to join me in saying that pharmacists should be able to get the same exact medicine in Canada or abroad at a fraction of the price they have to pay for in this country? Are you on board that legislation?
I've heard Bernie say in a VA committee hearing that if we can't afford a medicine, the government should just take over the intellectual property. It should commandeer the manufacturing plants, the distribution chain. It should become the pharmaceutical company. Lindsey Graham is right. Bernie's the most honest person in the Senate. He's a socialist, and he believes it. And he believes that the creativity of the pharmaceutical industry is not important. Oh, we can take that, but where will the cure for Alzheimer's come from? If now when there's a cure, the pharmaceutical company knows that their profit will be commandeered. I can tell you, it's a cheap fix to commandeer. And the price is tremendous. There won't be that cure for Alzheimer's. There won't be that cure for cancer. There won't be because there was a short-term grab. There are solutions, but it is not socialism.
Bernie didn't mention socialism, Bill. He didn't ask you to join him in nationalizing pharmaceutical companies. He asked you whether or not you would support his bill, which has bipartisan support, mind you, to allow Americans to import cheaper prescription drugs from Canada. And since you didn't have an answer, you chose to invoke the big bad socialist boogeyman. Well, we know that you decided to dodge that question like Neo from the Matrix because you've got shit. You have no substantive answer to that particular question. And Bernie Sanders was kind enough to give you a second chance to answer that question. And you chose, again, to not give a substantive answer.
Medicare, which purchases huge amounts of money, is a bad thing. You think it is wrong for pharmacists to be able to buy cheaper medicine, same exact brands, from Canada. Are you going to come on board that legislation? I don't know what you're really talking about taking over drug companies. What we want to do is lower the outrageously high prices in this country. I've given you 2 approaches that can work. Reimportation, Medicare negotiating. Are you on board?
Reimportation does not work. Canada has 10% of the population of the United States. You could take the entirety of Canada, shake it like a piggy bank, and all the drugs would come out, and it still wouldn't be enough for us all.
There are
ways to address this.
I'm the authority on Canada. I can see Canada from my porch. Okay? And I can tell you this, that the drug prices in Canada are half what they are in our country. And that's why Bernie's been involved in this. Lindsey's good friend, my good friend, Senator McCain, has a bill with me that would allow for this reimportation to bring in less expensive drugs. It has strong bipartisan support. Senator Collins is supportive of this bill. So that's what we'd like to work on.
So what I really liked about that particular clip is that towards the end there, Amy Klobuchar stepped in and really demonstrated just how big of a scumbag Bill Cassidy is, because for her and Bernie Sanders' bill, I mean, someone like Ted Cruz, a right-wing extremist from Texas, even thought that we should allow our citizens to import drugs from Canada, but Bill Cassidy won't do that. So that's how big of a scumbag he is. He's a bigger asshole than Ted Cruz, and that goes to show you just how much of an ass he made of himself during this debate. That was just one of many clips. I mean, it was an hour and a half long debate, but I'm glad that Amy Klobuchar popped up there because I also wanted to talk about her as well, and specifically her performance. Even though she didn't make an ass of herself during this debate, her behavior here was pretty telling because for some reason, she hasn't co-sponsored Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill, and during this debate, she wouldn't even dare to utter the words Medicare for All.
When you hear these, there are only two choices here. That's not true. There is another choice. That choice is right in front of us, where we have had those debates. We brought in Republican and Democratic governors, and this is something that will be one of the fixes that we can make to the Affordable Care Act. One way to do it would be Senator McCaskill's idea. Another idea would be Senator Schatz's. We have been working together on an option that you could buy into for Medicaid. That's a very efficiently run program. That's a bill that's going to come out in the next month or so. And then Senator Murphy of Connecticut is also working on one with Medicare. So these are options. I'm just tired of hearing about this false choice, that it is just the bill that's on the floor right now or one other bill. And Senator Sanders and I have the same goals here.
Amy is so tired of hearing about this false dichotomy of choices between just flat out repealing the Affordable Care Act and moving towards a single-payer healthcare system, because there's other options. I mean, we could try to fix the Affordable Care Act and move towards a public option and whatnot. Well, you know what, Amy? There is no dichotomy of choices, especially for Democrats like you. There's just one choice. You need to co-sponsor Medicare for All because that's what your base wants. I mean, the Democratic Party base, when you look at poll after poll, they overwhelmingly support the idea of single payer. So if you're not on board with that, then you're not really giving us a choice. You're trying to walk a fine line between what the base wants and your donors want. Medicare for All is what Canada has. It's what other countries have. And in not supporting it, you are showing that you don't really care about the American people. And look, to her credit, she's gone further than other Democrats in actually proposing things that might improve the Affordable Care Act. But unless we take that profit motive out of healthcare in America, we're never going to get a system that actually works for us. Now, why is it that Amy Klobuchar refuses to embrace Medicare for All, even when some of her more right-wing colleagues in the Senate have already chosen to do so? Well, it's because Amy's not a socialist.
I worked in the private sector. I'm no socialist, okay?
Well, if you really did work in the private sector, Amy, then that should make you a socialist, especially when you see how much power and influence private companies continue to exert on our government, specifically people like you. But look, again, I don't want to be too harsh on Amy Klobuchar here because she is better than other Democrats. She's not the worst that the Senate has to offer in terms of Democratic politicians. And her overall performance during this debate wasn't terrible. I was irritated and disappointed in her unwillingness to even say Medicare for All. I mean, going into this, I knew that she didn't co-sponsor Bernie Sanders' bill and didn't want to do that, but to not even say Medicare for All, I found that really frustrating. But she did do a good job at least debating, especially when she completely made a fool out of Bill Cassidy here with regard to one of his talking points that he used over and over throughout the debate.
First, let me say that 15 governors do support our bill. They actually think that they can do better in their state than the Obamacare law is currently doing. If a governor is engaged, she or he gets the people in their state enrolled. We get the governor engaged.
Senator Klobuchar?
Let me tell you what. Your own governor, Senator Cassidy, your own governor opposes this bill.
Ouch. So yeah, that was incredibly brutal, but nothing can compare to the performance of Bernie Sanders because hands down, he was the show stealer here tonight. And with this next clip here, I think this was really the death blow. I mean, to me, it was the highlight of the entire debate because it was when he really put Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy in their places, and they had absolutely nothing to say.
First of all, when you ask the American people about whether or not they like Obamacare compared to your plan, overwhelmingly the American people like the Affordable Care Act.
How many people know who
Second of
Graham
all,
Cassidy are?
one second. Second of all, it is easy to beat up on big bad federal government. Guys, do you know what the most popular health insurance program in America is? It's not the private insurance industry. It is
Medicare.
Medicare, yeah. That big, bad.
Which is falling apart.
Senator Cassidy and I are both on the Veterans Committee. Go out and talk to veterans. And what the polls show is that veterans are very, very positive toward the VA. Doesn't have problems, God knows it does. But veterans feel very good about it. In fact, it's the second most popular health care program in the country. Okay? So the point is, it's easy to say Obamacare isn't perfect. Everybody knows that. But the truth is that what people in this country see is a health insurance system designed to make insurance companies and drug companies huge profits. They want a cost-effective system that, in fact, deals with the needs of our people and not just the CEOs of large corporations. And that is why I personally believe, that if Medicare is working well for seniors right now, we can make it work for every man, woman, and child in this country through a Medicare for All program.
Bernie Sanders, ladies and gentlemen, completely stole the show there. Now, let me remind you that this was supposed to be a debate about whether or not Congress should repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, but Republicans and Bernie Sanders made this debate about Medicare for All, and really the only person trying to make it a debate about the Affordable Care Act was Amy Klobuchar, but really this effectively became an hour-and-a-half long advertisement for Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill. And the Republican Party, or certainly the individuals that were there, Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Graham, they thought that they would have a leg up on Bernie Sanders if they continued to invoke the big government socialist boogeyman, but it didn't work at all here because Bernie Sanders knew what arguments they would introduce, and he had the right rhetoric to effectively combat their bullshit. So I thought that Bernie Sanders, he stole the show here. He put them in their places, and overall, I mean, it really shows that momentum is on our side, especially when we have someone like Bernie Sanders arguing so persuasively in favor of Medicare for All. So what I thought would be a disappointing debate was actually really great because it just showed that Bernie Sanders knows what he's doing here with Medicare for All. And I'm so glad that Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy embarrassed themselves during this debate because after proposing that draconian bill that would strip millions of Americans from their health insurance, they deserve to be embarrassed because they are scumbag politicians completely beholden to the health insurance industry.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.